Did you ever have one of those moments in life where you were just possessed with this overwhelming moment of clarity? Maybe you were struggling to make a decision about something important that was about to happen, and you just kind of struggled with it. And as time wore on, it grew harder and harder to make that decision. Maybe it was a time in which you were graduating from high school or college or something, and you're trying to figure out what you're to do with your life. And then during those times, as things get harder and harder, it just seems like a moment just happens where you get this overwhelming sense of clarity about it. And what seemed to be just like a few moments before, you were in a complete fog, but now you have this clarity. You know exactly what to do. You know exactly where you're heading. Have you ever had one of those types of moments in your life? Judging by this long list of names on the page of that we are voting on for the names of the church, and all the trouble that we've had coming up to compile those names, and we have to have absolute clarity on what our name's going to be by the end of this service. Judging by that, I would have to say that these moments of absolute clarity do not happen very often, right? But when they do happen, it's wonderful, right? Because it changes things. It changes your direction. You now have a crystal clear understanding of what you are to do. You have focus. You have direction in life. I had one of those moments when I was trying to discern what I was going to do with my life after I stopped being a truck driver and I was in an accident. And after I recovered from that accident, I felt like I was in this process of discerning a call to ministry. But the truth was, I wasn't really certain where my life was heading. I wasn't really certain if it was an authentic call. I was working my way through my undergraduate degree in organizational development, and if anyone knows me, it sounds kind of funny that I would have any kind of degree in anything that says organizing or organization. But what I understood is it was sort of a broad-based business degree, and at the time, although I was serving in missions and doing more for the church, trying to discern my call, I was also thinking about, well, maybe after I graduate, I'll just get me one of those business-type jobs when I'm done. Shows you how much I know about this degree, because I didn't even know what type of business-type job I was going to find. I just knew it had something to do with business. But it was during that time that I was on a mission trip to an orphanage in Russia, and it was a summer mission trip, which was unusual for us. We usually went in the wintertime, and so since we had gone in the summer, we decided that we were going to throw an outdoor barbecue for the orphans. And so we did this down by, they had a little riverbank that was near the orphanage, and after this barbecue was over, we were gathering up all the stuff that we had laid out for the barbecue, and we were taking it back to the orphanage, which was about 100 yards away. And for some reason, I seemed to be always sort of the pack mule for the group. You know, anytime we did anything, they basically loaded up both arms and my back with as much stuff they could throw on me, and then I would be on my way. That was my job with the mission. So that's what happened. What seemed to be an entire Cabela's warehouse full of gear was under both my arms and hanging on my back, and I was starting off for the 100-yard trek back to the orphanage. And before I knew it, there was this little 6 or 7-year-old little orphan kid tugging at the stuff on my back. You know, he was wanting to give me a hand, you know, lighten my load a little bit. And I had no problem with that. You know, kids need to learn how to work. And 6 or 7 seems like a good age to start. So I let him take all that I had on my back, and he struggled, and he put it on his back, and we went on our way. Well, I took about 3 steps before he jumped on my back. Yeah. He decided to help me. He was going to put the stuff on his back, and then I would have to piggyback him all the way back to the orphanage. Well, when in Rome, you do what the kids want to do. So I put him on my neck, and he was holding on to my head. I remember his fingers getting into my eyes. You know how little kids are when they're riding on your back. And I was walking on the way back to the orphanage, and he's speaking to me. He's very happy, and he's speaking, and I'm speaking back to him, although he's speaking Russian and I'm speaking English, so there wasn't a lot of communicating going on. He had fetal alcohol syndrome too, so I don't even know if he was speaking Russian, but he was so joyous and so happy to be getting this ride on my back, and it was right there in this Russian farm field. I don't know, it was the beauty of the day, the sun was going down, it was just this wonderful moment, this overwhelming feeling of complete satisfaction of what I was doing. And so there was this overwhelming feeling that God was saying to me, this is what I made you for. I didn't hear this in an audible voice, but it was this feeling. This is what I made you for, to serve me by serving others. It was a moment of absolute clarity of what I was to do. I was to become a minister. And so that's what I did. Those moments of clarity, they don't happen very often, as we all know. But when they do, you know exactly who you are, you know where you're headed, and you know what you're to do next. They're wonderful moments. The Transfiguration story that we've been going over for what seems to be a month now, this Transfiguration story that was read in Luke's version, we read Matthew's a few weeks ago, but for all the Gospels, the Transfiguration story is one of absolute clarity. It's one of those clarifying moments for the disciples of Jesus. And from that moment on, things change in the Gospels because of the clarity they have. Quick review leading up for today. The Jewish hope at the time of Jesus was for a Messiah, that we've been talking about this, a new Moses to be raised up from the house of David, to gather and strengthen the scattered people of the nation of Israel from the 12 tribes that have been scattered, to begin a new Exodus, inaugurating a new Passover, to move from freedom from slavery to a new promised land. In the old Exodus, of course, it was a vertical movement, it was a horizontal movement from from one place to another, like one location to another, from Egypt to Jerusalem. And this new one that would be inaugurated in would be a horizontal movement from Jerusalem to a heavenly promised land, a new Jerusalem, which at the time no one was really understanding yet. Also, they would be sustained along the way. They would be given a foretaste of this new promised land through the Messiah raining down a new manna from heaven. And over the last 3 weeks, that's what we've been doing. We've been showing how Jesus is the Messiah that they were waiting for, and that the disciples and the people had been waiting for. After Jesus' baptism, which we spoke of a few weeks ago, which was sort of the beginning of this whole process, this new Exodus, Jesus immediately goes in the desert to fast. He was spending time wandering around and praying and meditating on the Lord, all the while he was being tempted by the devil. How long does this take? He's out there for 40 days, which reflects the Old Testament exodus of the nation wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years. After this, then Jesus begins the work of gathering the scattered 12 tribes and strengthening the nation. Jesus begins this work of restoring in the exact same location that the scattering began, in the land of Zebulun and Naphtali. Those are 2 tribes, the first 2 that were scattered. Matthew 4 says, "Now when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and made his home in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah may be fulfilled. And then we have this portion from our Old Testament reading. It's quoted, pointing to the fulfillment of Jesus. Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, on the road by the sea across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. And for those who sat in the region and shadow of death, light has dawned. You see, these two, Zebulun and Naphtali, they were the first of the 12 tribes to be scattered during the Assyrian overtaking, or the Assyrian conquering in 700 BC. So Jesus begins the restoring in this land. And he also calls his first disciples there too as well, Simon Peter and brother Andrew. You see, by doing this, in this place, Jesus is restoring and gathering the lost and scattered tribes into one nation again, like Moses, strengthening the nation, preparing them for the Exodus. After this, Jesus continues to unite the people in the order in which they were exiled. This is seen in Luke 4 with Jesus gathering, teaching, and healing in the northern regions of Galilee. Then in Luke 9, Jesus works his way through the middle regions of Samaria. In Luke 10, he eventually arrives at the southern region of Judea. By doing this, Jesus is retracing the steps of the Assyrian and the Babylonian exiles, from north at first, then to the south, strengthening by teaching and healing and gathering and restoring through calls to baptism and repentance and belief in him, which leads us all to the Transfiguration story in Luke 9. Back to that Transfiguration where we began a few weeks ago. The Gospels place the Transfiguration story immediately after Peter announces that he believes that Jesus is the Messiah. And then immediately after Peter proclaims this, Jesus foretells his death and his suffering and his resurrection. He tells them that as the Messiah, he's going to be tortured and killed and then raised on the third day in Jerusalem. You know the story. Peter doesn't like to hear this. And then Jesus says to Peter, "Stand behind me, Satan." Well, that's the story that happens right before this. And the point is that at this moment, the disciples are not getting it, right? Before they go up on this mountain, they're just not getting what Jesus was and what Jesus was here to do. They're not getting that this kingdom of God, that the promised land that Jesus as the Messiah is ushering in or leading them to, looks nothing like the one that they were expecting. You see, in many ways, they were expecting a earthly Messiah, like a Moses, to come in and gather up the nations, to lead them out of slavery to another holy promised land, which basically meant lead them out of the current slavery that they were in to the Romans, right? To overthrow them and then basically kick out all those who didn't believe in the God of Israel out of the land and restore the temple back to the Jewish people. All the 12 lost and scattered tribes would then be able to be united once again. The disciples didn't get that Jesus wasn't this guy. Jesus was going to be so much more. You see, Jesus was leading all, not just them, all to a promised land that laid claim on the heart of each and every soul. Not just the chosen people, but everyone. And this salvation that Jesus was ushering in was first to the lost sheep of Israel, just like Jesus says in Matthew 15. But then after his resurrection, it would be for all the nations, meaning all the Gentiles too. And he said this at his ascension. You know, the Great Commission, go and make disciples of all the nations. You see, Jesus was here to bring a kingdom that would free every human heart, not just freedom from slavery to all authorities or governments, which are temporal things, but he came to free every human heart from slavery that was eternal, slavery to sin, and the consequences of that sin, which meant eternal death. So for every single human heart, they would be forever free from the ultimate slavery which led to death. Forever free unto ages of ages. Jesus was leading to a promised land that was not a physical place in which its ruler would be behind a closed door somewhere living in a castle, but in a person, not ruling from a throne, but ruling in the heart, mind, and soul of every single human being that followed him. This was the type of Messiah that Jesus was here, or why Jesus was here. But the disciples weren't getting it. To imagine their long-awaited Messiah as someone to be executed and dying seemed more like defeat than any kind of glory. Enter the Transfiguration story. And from start to finish, this story spoke volumes to the disciples. It gave clarity to the disciples in ways that Jesus' words never did. Luke isn't as specific. Luke says somewhere around 8 days, but Matthew's version is very specific. Matthew's version says that Jesus went up on the mountain after 6 days. And what is after 6 days? The seventh day, right? Like Moses received the 10 commandments of God on Mount Sinai in Exodus 22 on the seventh day. Or like God brought creation to completion in Genesis on the seventh day. Also, on the mountain it says Jesus' face shone like the sun, and his garment glistened in dazzling white. The Jewish disciples, they knew exactly what was taking place when this happened. Because you see, Jesus wasn't the only one that was ever transfigured on a mountain. So was Moses in the Old Testament. Exodus says that when Moses came down the mountain after receiving the 10 commandments, his face glowed. He was transfigured too. This glowing was validation to the disciples or to the people at the time that Moses had truly spoken with God. And so you see, the glowing in Jesus' face on that mountain was the same validation for the disciples. Jesus was with God. Then there was also, they saw Moses himself and Elijah, 2 dead guys that were now standing, appearing with Jesus, representing the entire Old Testament Exodus story and the prophetic voice in the Old Testament, which was pointing constantly to Jesus as the new Messiah, the new Moses, the new Exodus to begin. And what does Scripture say they were discussing with Jesus? His departure in Jerusalem. The Greek word translated as departure is Exodus. So they were literally discussing Jesus' Exodus. And then finally, there was the voice of God. The voice of God telling them who Jesus was, that he was God's own beloved Son. How did they know that this was the voice of God? Because God came to them in the exact same way that God had traditionally come before, in a bright cloud. You see, this was the same cloud which led the Israelites people during the Exodus in Exodus 13. This was the same cloud that dwelt in the tabernacle in Exodus 40. And this was the same cloud that descended to give the tablets of the law to Moses in Exodus 34. The point being, all through the Old Testament Exodus, there is this picture of the cloud inside of which was the mysterious glory and presence of God. And when the disciples heard this voice in this cloud, they knew exactly who it was. It was God. And it says they knelt down because they knew they were in his presence. So for the disciples, the Transfiguration story made things crystal clear. It was a moment of absolute clarity. It was the affirmation of what everything Jesus was saying that he was. He was the Messiah. He was divine. He was God's Son. And he was going to gather the lost and the scattered tribes of Israel. He was going to lead a new exodus, an exodus from slavery to a new promised land, a new Jerusalem. And he was also going to suffer and die and resurrect and then live and reign for eternity, never leaving anyone behind. And through the Transfiguration story, the disciples were able to see Jesus' glory through all the shame that suffering death might be. They were able to see the triumph through the humiliation that was on the horizon and the victory beyond that coming cross in which Jesus was speaking of. It was truly a mountaintop experience that changed everything for the disciples. It was the turning point for all these Gospels. From that moment on in all of the Gospels, things become a little more serious because it's onward to Jerusalem. They descend that mountain and they're on their way to Jerusalem for a Passover sacrifice, for a cross at Golgotha, and then a light bursting forth from a tomb pointing the way to salvation for every single human being. Freedom from slavery is on the way. Glory be to the Lord our God, Jesus the Christ. Amen.